Thank you. Well, welcome, everyone. Good afternoon for our ones that have stuck it through. So glad that you're here and thrilled to be speaking to you. I thought before I introduced our incredible panel that I would talk about an aha moment that I had early in my career. And my first real job was when I was 16 years old. It was a summer job working in Jones Beach State Park. I grew up on Long Island, New York. And so I guess I did so well in the first week of my job that I was immediately promoted to burger flipper. No. But for my first week, I was actually a janitor, which was hilarious because I never lifted a finger at home. My grandmother from Hungary lived with us, and she didn't think that my standards were up to her standards, so I never cleaned anything. But there I was for that first week, and I was a janitor in my snazzy green polyester jumpsuit. And I was in the ladies' room, and I was actually cleaning out a stall. So as I was in there, a woman tried to walk in, didn't realize I was in there with her two small kids. And then she saw me in there, and she went like this to basically protect her kids from me, to shield them, to hold them back, and actually said, "Don't touch it." Don't touch it, meaning me, referring to me. And I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it. Nobody ever spoke to me or about me like that in my life. I was actually a nice, clean, nice girl from Long Island, and actually from an upper middle class family. My father was a patent attorney, worked in Manhattan for a Fortune 500 company. And I was just horrified, but mostly I was horrified, I think not so much for me, but for those two little kids growing up in that environment with that role model. So anyway, it was a pivotal career moment for me because I realized right from the beginning that I never wanted to make anyone feel like that, ever in my life, treat them like that. And then also that people in the workplace, regardless of your role, but if you're doing good, honest, hard work serving people, you should always be treated with dignity and respect. So flash forward, it was a pivotal moment for me because I became an organizational psychologist, and my career's been all about helping leaders learn to both achieve results, but to do so in a way that fosters and maintains and improves humanity in the workplace. So that's my quick little story, and everybody loves a good story, so that's what we're here to hear about from these four women. So what I'd like to do is that we're going to hear about, from each of them one at a time, about their challenges, the obstacles they overcame, the results that they achieved, the lessons that they learned, the rewards that they earned, and how their pivotal experiences, their aha moments, shaped how they thought about themselves as well as about how they acted in their workplaces, in their world. So how we're going to do this is that I'm going to introduce each of the women, and then one at a time, give them 5-ish minutes to share their story from their perspective. Then I'll ask them a few pointed questions, and then I definitely want to make sure that we have a good 10, 15, maybe even 20 minutes to have you ask questions of them, because this typically tends to be one of the most popular panels in the summit, because again, we can hear the success stories that we can all learn from. Sound good? All right, good. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. So first, we have Dr. Orna Berry, she's the corporate VP for EMC in Israel, and also a Hall of Fame inductee. So welcome. Thank you. Jennifer Cambern, who's the VP of product management for ADP, is next. Lama Nachman, who's the principal engineer at Intel Labs. And finally, Lauren States, who's the VP of Strategy and Transformation for IBM, and also a Hall of Fame inductee this evening. Thank you. So, Orna, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, so I twice considered the Guinness Book of Records. The first time I considered the Guinness Book of Records when I was delivering my first son, and it took 72 hours from every 5 minutes of labor until he was out, and he was out alive, even though we dehydrated on the way and such. But this is not the topic for today. The second time of getting to the Guinness Book of Records was in the company that I chaired called PrimeSense. And people may not know the name PrimeSense, that it's a recent acquisition of Apple, but will know very well Kinect. And Kinect got into the Guinness Book of Records, and I'll tell you shortly how it did. And this is a blend of white hair and seniority. Everybody thinks I'm serious because of my age, but that's not a proof of anything. And the great talent of the team that composed the entrepreneurs of PrimeSense. So PrimeSense was a company that took three-dimensional capture and understanding into consumer prices. And we developed a component that was actually a sensor that was making machines see in 3 dimensions and identify the figures. And we were very happy with the technology results. But of course, investing in semiconductors require joint ventures with large market players. And who are the big market players who are possible? There were about 3 of them. It was Sony, it was Microsoft, and it was Nintendo. So we met all of them. And eventually, we had this particular meeting in the consumer. It wasn't the Consumer and Electronics Show. It was the Games Show in Los Angeles, near my alma mater, USC. And we spent a lot of time in USC because they are doing a lot of gaming. And we had this meeting set by a colleague and who sent an incubation guy. Now, we have talked to zillion people, and always it was very interesting, and they were very excited, and they were seeing how you play with the machine, for example, boxing and stuff like that, and how fast you really get the feeling in the air that you're actually hitting something physical where there is nothing other than the image coming from the machine, and the machine is responding in real time, fun. So this guy comes, and he is, as I say, Microsoft incubation, and we are 2 people in the room, the key entrepreneur and myself. I represent distinction, and he represents agility, and here the meeting goes. At the end of the meeting, actually, it took 30 seconds for me to understand that we are on a big thing. Because the reaction of the guy, who is a very talented and very well-known person in immersive computing, the reaction of the guy was unbelievable. He just couldn't believe that something like that stands in front of his eyes. And it was clear to me that if we do not make mistakes, and this is something very important in teams, and we continue to play the game of serious agreements and playful demonstrations, we are in. Indeed, before the financial meltdown, we had an agreement with Microsoft. And the product Kinect that went into the Guinness Book of Records was based on the component from PrimeSense. And this was hard work, but 30 seconds that we could see going through.
Congratulations, wonderful story. Thank you, thank you. That was amazing. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
And I love that key message about remembering to have fun and be playful, right, in the midst of it all.
Yeah, don't take yourself too seriously. Just bring the best forward.
Whatever
best
color your
breed,
hair.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Okay, Jennifer.
So good afternoon, everyone. Jennifer Cambern. Just wanted to give you a little bit about who I am and who I work for before jumping into that aha moment. So I work for ADP. I'm the Chief Product Officer for them. That means I'm responsible for product management and product ownership across around 130 products. ADP is one of the largest cloud software as a service providers. We're in the business of human capital management. We pay 1 in every 6 US citizens, as well as pay folks over 125 countries throughout the United States, or throughout the world rather. And also, we recently processed over 15 million enrollments in benefits and open enrollment, unlike that other website we won't talk about. So along with that, I personally am responsible for a product. It's about a $2.5 billion revenue product utilized by 50,000 companies across the world. I would say my aha moment, it's funny that you kicked off the theme. We're going to continue with bathroom humor today, it appears.
Okay.
My aha moment that I selected today to share with you did actually happen at the ladies' room. At the time, I worked for a company, a company here in the States, and I was attending what would have been my 14th in a row monthly senior management meetings. We got together every month, all of the managers from across the globe. And as we broke, what I realized was, once again, the only two people in the ladies' room were myself and the head of HR. It was really a moment that made me take pause. Meanwhile, the gentleman's room down the hall has a line out the door and around the corner, while the other 78 representatives of our company waited. It was that moment standing there that I thought, hey, it's just me and the HR lady. And it's always the HR lady, isn't it? And that wasn't where I wanted to be. And approximately 3 hours later, we had another break, and there was another company that was there at the same conference center. And when I went into the ladies' room, there were at least 20 other ladies that were in the ladies' room. And it was that moment, that little aha, that made me realize that sometimes we have to vote with our feet, and we have to stand behind the type of environment where we want to be represented and we want to be included. And indeed, as luck would have it, I actually went to work for that same company approximately 8 months later, which was LexisNexis, who has a very inclusive history of women in their leadership. But my point there is to say that we need to think long and hard about who we're surrounded by and how we're growing and how our employers and our work treats us and respects us, and what that message is back to us. And if we don't like that message, sometimes we have to make a different choice.
Thank you. Well, you can network and you can get aha moments anywhere, right? So fabulous. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, Lama?
So I'm Lama Nachman. I work on context awareness and creating technologies that help people get better understanding of themselves and help them in different aspects of their lives. And it was kind of an interesting thing being at Intel for the last 11 years now. And as I started working in these different spaces, starting in wireless sensor networks about 11 years ago, which today we think of as IoT, and then moving into health and wearable technologies, and then moving into mobile sensing and understanding, on sensors from phones, how can we understand users better? What was really interesting to me is that throughout the time, every single time I presented any of this work, and I present extensively at different technical conferences and so on, I always got the same question, which is, what does this have to do with Intel? And people think of Intel as a company that makes chips,
CPUs,
and the more I talked about it, the more I started to explain why is that relevant and so on. But to me, what was interesting is that for years, I always felt that I worked on something that's tangential to Intel's bottom line, right? And I was pushing and pushing for these technologies, and sometimes we would get really great traction, and then we will disinvest from some technology that would make it, okay, now we have to go figure out again, how do we make sensing and sense-making more relevant to Intel? And through different changes within the research agenda, but continuously trying to influence the bottom line and Intel's bottom line. And the aha moment for me was a year ago, when I was in a meeting, and we were talking about how all of these technologies that we've been building and all of these algorithms are actually finally going to get deployed on Intel Silicon, and how we've made actually changes to the silicon to make these platforms more capable of being power efficient as they are aware continuously of the user. And one of the people in MCG, so this is after having gazillion discussions with people across the different business units that we were trying to influence year after year, and always hearing why is this important? Why would Intel invest in this technology? Why is this relevant? Isn't this just software? And so on. That meeting a year ago, across 3 different business units, people standing up and saying, this is one of the most fundamental capabilities that are going to change what Intel Silicon is. And it's all about user experience. And if we don't understand users more holistically, we'll never be able to create relevant silicon or relevant platforms in that space. And to me, that was just, like I had to stop and think about all of this work for all of these years when we kept just trying to find the path through. And manipulate the research, change it in different ways to make it relevant, but not giving up, right? And to me, the biggest thing that I came out with is you should never take no for an answer, right? Because a lot of times, if you're early on in that technology, when people don't see that connection, it really takes a lot of hard work to get to that point and to change, the mind and hearts of people. But, if, clearly you don't want to be too stubborn to never see where you're headed, but if you're so far ahead, it's very hard to actually get the validation right then and there. And it's only in retrospect that you could look back and say, wow, I'm really glad I stuck with it.
Yeah. Fabulous, fabulous. Power of sticking power, yeah. And I love that story also because as we know so often, where do the new paradigms come from? They come from the edges. And the edges can be inside a multinational corporation, right? And it can still be the edges. But I love that, continuing to stay on the path and fight the good path, and fight the good fight and not taking no for the answer. So absolutely. Okay, now Lauren.
Oh, thank you. So I'm Lauren States. I'm a VP with IBM in our software business. And I've had a really marvelous career. In fact, I went to the Wharton School. And I was supposed to study accounting because my dad was actually an IRS agent. That's a really good kind of person to have in your family. And his dream was for me to study accounting, and that lasted for about 20 minutes. And then I started programming. He was horrified. He's like, what is COBOL? I said, don't worry, Dad. I'll go work at IBM, and you know what that is, so everything will work out. So I did come to IBM. I've been at IBM all my career, but I feel like I've had so many different careers in IBM. I've mostly worked in technology. I love working on all the leading edge technology, kind of just like you said. You're not really quite sure, is this the next big thing, but I'm addicted to it, so I can't stop doing that. I've also had an opportunity, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to do strategy work. I've been doing strategy work for the past 4 years. I've worked globally. I was the second executive into Vietnam, and I think maybe one of the only executives to go to meet with my client in Medellin. When my husband called me and asked me where I was that day, I remember pretending the phone had no service and hung up on him, but it was really a marvelous experience working with that customer. And I've had an opportunity to work on major systems of building organizational capability or talent within the firm. So my aha moment, and there were so many, like all the other women on the panel to choose from, was about 10 years ago. I got a call from our senior vice president who runs our software business, Steve Mills, and he asked to go work on a corporate transformation project at the request of the chairman. And I love my job, so my first reaction was, that's really nice, but I really love my job and I need to stay here. But he said, no, that the chairman really needs you to take your technology skills and apply them to workforce development. Totally out of my wheelhouse. I'd never really worked formally in workforce development or talent management in the center of it, more on the fringes. And so that project, we called it our Client Value Initiative, was really meant around the 2008 timeframe to look at the whole company and to say, actually it was 2006, everything's on the table. We're doing really well as a company, but what would we change that would make us materially better? And it was like, an open field to look at everything. We looked at business models, we looked at go-to-market, we looked at processes, we looked at the workforce. And I got to learn the whole company because we really run 4 businesses within IBM: software, hardware, services, and consulting. It was a tremendous growth experience. But the aha for me was not really that so much, because I really grew in that role, and I look back on it and I say, how lucky was I to be selected? It was afterwards when my clients sought me out to come in and speak about transformation, because they needed the transformation roadmap, and experience and expertise to help them implement technology. And I had a couple of really marvelous experiences. I met with the Army Executive Board and talked to them about how you drive transformation in a really large organization like the Army. The Army is 1.2 million people, both defense and civilians, very complicated model. And then I was invited by NATO to speak in Split, Croatia, to their finance managers about handling large-scale transformation. And so, for me, an experience that I was reluctant to take because it wasn't in my wheelhouse of technology, and working on workforce development, which was not a specialty at all, turned out to parlay into a real opportunity to get into senior offices and talk at the very top about, what are your issues, same as our issues, and what did you do, kind of same as what did we do, to have that dialogue. And that, I look back and I say, never underestimate, based on what you think is the right path forward, the fact that the more broad and deep you can become across a number of areas, the more valuable you can be. And so that's my story.
Great, thank you. Well, I think the other thing that your story highlights, Lauren, is what we're trying to do here, is that what you did was you really learned from other leaders, right?
I sure
absolutely, by communicating and speaking and collecting data broadly. So fabulous. Okay. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Jennifer and then to Orna, and to ask the question. We all know the expression that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, right? And we've all had times in our careers where we feel like we could be stopped, that we're facing some kind of obstacle or challenge, and we really legitimately don't know if we can overcome it, whether it's our first formal leadership position, international assignment, new company, whatever it might be. So my question to you first, Jennifer, is do you have an example of when you overcame a significant obstacle and the leadership lessons that you learned from it?
Sure. So thank you for the question first. I think it was very interesting as we were talking over some of the questions today. This was one of the questions we discussed, and Lauren and I actually stopped for a second and talked about the definition of the question. We talked about the fact that the things that often we feel are insurmountable are the things that we don't control in our lives, right? And sometimes that has to do with our career, but oftentimes it's the other roles we're asked to play. I'm married 29 years. I have 2 lovely children. I was asked to take a leadership role by H&R Block at a startup. We were losing about $12 million, and in the span of 2 years, we made that business profitable to the tune of plus $8 million. So amazing success, amazing turnaround. They rewarded us by promptly selling us. So I had the opportunity of participating in that sale. It was an amazing business experience to be part of that process of going out and finding venture capitalists that were interested in buying our business, of going through the due diligence process, which we did. 1 week before we announced the sale of the business, I was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. So faced with losing a job, I have 6 months left to work, I'm starting chemo, and I got to go on COBRA insurance, right? And I've got a child getting ready to go to college, and I've got another one that's in. It's those kind of things that really test your mental, your mettle and what you're made of, and how you're going to think about the greater experience that we have. What I learned from that experience has been invaluable to me, and I heard some of it in our previous panel. One of the previous panel speakers made the comment that you have to reach out sometimes and ask for help. I think as very, very strong women, certainly of a certain generation, we've had to be so strong and so tough along the way that sometimes asking for that help is almost as insurmountable as the problem, right? So I was able to, and it's funny, my husband actually pulled me aside and he said, honey, you've done all these great things for other women, all the people you've helped promote, all the people you've mentored. Have you reached out to that group? And we had a very soul-searching conversation about how hard that was to ask for help. So I think if there was anything I learned from that experience, it's that sometimes you do have to ask for help. Sometimes you have to reach out on that network and fire it up and say, I need your help me figure this out. So, you know, a funny story that I tell is about the first time I went out looking for a job. I had just finished up chemo, I was starting radiation, I knew that it was time for me to get back active, and here I live in Atlanta. So there is nothing worse than being in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's 87 degrees and 86% humidity, and you have to put on the hair hat, as my husband refers to the wig. So you put on your hair hat and you draw your eyebrows on, and then you put your eyelashes on, because you know you've got to kind of present a good face for a face-to-face interview. And you're hoping as you're driving your car that your eyebrows aren't melting along the way, or that you don't rub them off. You know, so what my network did for me, being able to ask for help and stepping up and doing that, what it did for me is I had a whole lot of ladies and individuals I'd helped throughout my lifetime that were able to help me get consultative type engagements until I was ready to re-engage in the employment process. But I will tell you that the hardest thing that I've ever faced was really that admission that I needed help, that I had to reach out to my network, and that it's okay to do that. So that's, I would say that would be the experience.
Wow, I didn't know that story. Amazing. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. Well, I have to ask, how are you doing now?
I'm doing great. I've been 6 years clean, so
Wow.
a fabulous story.
Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And you know, the only thing I would say to that, Jennifer, right away, is what a gift it was for all those women who you helped probably to be able to help you.
It was wonderful.
You know, that, I mean, so often when we see very strong people, as, you know, men or women, that we wonder how can we contribute to them, how we can give back. And your reaching out was as much a gift to them as I'm sure it was for you. So remember that. So thank you. Okay, Orna, I'd like to ask the same question of you. A challenge you overcame that you thought maybe you wouldn't be able to. What you learned?
So when I took the position at EMC 3.5 years ago, actually it was a funny situation. I was in Australia in Forbes conference for Asian CEOs, and I got a call from a wonderful man at EMC who asked me if I'll be interested in a job of putting together all the acquisitions that EMC made in Israel into one entity. So, you know, in the past when I was called by the government to serve as chief scientist, which is one of the two director generals responsible for large research and development administration, I said, no, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm not fit. Took about two sessions with the government for them to convince me that maybe they're looking for somebody who is not a fit. And in this particular case, this was after the meltdown, the financial meltdown, where the kind of technologies that I was interested in could not reach the kind of investments that were required. Like PrimeSense would have not been invested after the meltdown. It had the Microsoft agreement before the meltdown. So I had a conversation about 1.5 years before this call that somebody asked me what will be my next step. And I say that if a serious multinational corporation will come into Israel wanting to really exploit the capabilities of Israel strategically, it will be of interest. And always in Israel, the example that I have in front of my eyes is the impact that Intel has. It has a huge impact on Intel as a corporate, and it has a huge impact on Israel as hosting Intel as a multinational corporation that takes the risk and does strategic initiatives out of Israel. So I told him that I'm on the road. I just got to Sydney. I was dead sick. I told him that I'm on the road for 2.5 weeks. I was in the conference, then joined by 15 Israeli companies, then went to China to see about clean tech and collaboration between Australia, China, and Israel. And then I'll come back to Israel and ask him not to call me back on the day I land, but to call me back on the day after, and he did. And then I didn't want to have interviews on a telepresence because I'm a fairly well-known figure in Israel, and I said if I twice step into the same office, it's all over the papers. Let's have the decisions without pressure. Let's do it Skype. Skype is not within security. So we had, everybody called me from their private computers, and I had a week of interviews, and then I went and went to the States, and I got an offer and took it. Now, the key issue is that when you work in a multinational corporation, and particularly a corporation that is organized by business units, it's very hard to make a change. So creating an innovation, a model that is actually exploiting what Israel has to bring to the table, and more so, with a multinational corporation, a model that can actually suit other countries as well. It doesn't have to be all a state of, a startup nation. It can be other types of capabilities that are system capabilities and such, and you need to incorporate them. And there is a difference between having the headquarters in, be it Massachusetts or California, and really empowering the remote sites and identifying people by their skill set. And some of the best people are not in the United States for all the corporations. So I did the integration. After a year after I came on board, we moved into a new facility in the center of Israel with everything that was acquired by then by EMC, and then opened another site in a new location, new geography that did not have the kind of basically a high-tech industry. We needed to work with the local university to engage. This is the city of Be'er Sheva, and it worked well. And then was the question of, okay, now we're set. What's the next big thing? And the next big thing is that Israel is a country that is 1/800 of the Middle East in geographical terms, and 1/50 in population. And it's not very popular in the region. And the technology is also very important in defense, like cybersecurity, for example. And the question was, how do you do something that is lateral across the different organizations, that is making two types of contributions into EMC. One is in actually building cross-business unit kind of activity, and the other one is having a punchline that the experts will come and work on it. So, it's difficult to do a startup within a multinational corporation. You described one. To cut the long story short, the entrepreneur, who is a misfit in large organizations, got really the full backing. And this is not by doing it myself. This is by communicating systematically with people and showing the case and bringing people over to see the opportunity and taking them even to Intel to see what Intel has done along the years, and finally getting funding for 4 years to actually show the point. And now it is my job to do similar kind of activities in other countries. So I came where everybody would tell me no chance. I'm a little stupid, so I don't understand what people are telling me, or what people are telling me and I don't want to understand. And finding the path to actually make this into a benefit and a different thought leadership within the corporate. And not only within the corporate of EMC, because the exercise in terms of technology that we're doing applies to EMC, to VMware, to Pivotal, and to RSA. So those 4 companies in the EMC group are all affected and all contributors, as well as all the business units within, to this kind of effort. And I'm very proud that something that was considered impossible, when presented in the right way and analyzed, not paralyzed but analyzed, is actually taking off. And I think the first time that it came to my mind that we should take this course was during one of the executive visits from EMC to Israel in November of 2000, and we're now 14, so 2012. And by mid 2013, there was support, and by beginning of 2014, there was funding.
Wow, congratulations, amazing, amazing. And not only, I think, was that a story of overcoming obstacles that could have seemed insurmountable, but also reinventing yourself several times, from an entrepreneur to working for the government ministry to integrating across the business units of this international corporation within
It's always
Israel.
staying an entrepreneur.
It's always, that's right. It's always being an entrepreneur. Exactly. That's right. That's your blessing across throughout your life path. Excellent. All right. So now I'd like to turn it back to Lauren and Lama. And what I'd like to ask you is that I know from coaching women leaders to develop their change intelligence, for example, that the first step often in our developing ourselves as leaders is that awareness of our strengths, awareness of our developmental opportunities. And that's actually a point that Sheryl Sandberg makes in Lean In, that sometimes we have unintentional blind spots that we don't see that unconsciously subvert our success. So I'm wondering if you could speak to, maybe first you, Lauren, about what may be one of the most common or some of the most common blind spots that we as women have internally that maybe we don't know about, that you've seen.
So,
Yeah.
you know, over lunch we had a really great conversation about our inner voice, and sometimes that, you know, our inner voice is negative or not supporting or a lot of doubt. And I have a really great story about that, you know, because I think like most women in the room, we've all been through this and thought through it. I worked for a really fabulous executive maybe about 15 or 20 years ago. And I was at the cusp of my career when I had been asked to take on greater responsibility and go lead our technical team, actually build and lead our global technical team for our client-facing work that we did globally. And I have a knack for solving problems. It's something that I've always really liked to do. And so at the time we were developing a particular product that was very, very innovative and very new, and we had to put a lot of muscle into, you know, getting it to work. And part of the opportunity was to help get this product launched, but also to build this global team. And a lot of the people in the headquarters organization knew of me, but they didn't know really a lot about me. And so my manager at the time said to me the most incredible thing. He said, "You don't really like to advocate for yourself, do you, Lauren?" And I proudly answered that no, of course I did not like that. Like any self-respecting, you know, female geek or whatever I was at the time. And he said to me, he said, "You know, I understand that, but if you want to represent this community that means so much to you," at that time it was the professional architects and specialists, and I had been one in my early career, and so the community meant a lot to me. He said, "You have to have a voice of power and represent them on their behalf. In other words, you have to have power on behalf of the community that you lead if you so choose to lead them." And it was really a seminal moment for me, because I realized that self-advocacy and power were not about me, but really it was about my constituency, it was about being a leader, and it was about representing the company in the best way. And in that moment, I found a way to advocate for myself on behalf of others that was very comfortable. And so I think it was a really great lesson for me. When I mentor and coach a lot of people who have this issue or this challenge, and I tell them the story, and look, I can't tell you what is the right way for you, but what I would say is that you have to shed all these images that self-advocacy means standing around bragging about yourself at the expense of other people, because it's really not that. It's really asserting, I think in the most authentic way, not only the work that you've done, but the work that all the people around you are doing and deserve to have the recognition for.
Thank you for sharing that, Lauren, because that is one of the biggest issues with the women that I've coached and work with. And we do have that opinion sometimes. We're raised that positive self-advocacy is bragging. And there is actually a great book called Brag. And it's the subtitle is something to the effect of opening your mouth without putting your foot in it, something like that. But it's all about how not doing that is actually stingy. Because if we're going to follow, it's stingy. It's stingy for yourself and your team because they won't get the recognition that they deserve. And it's also stingy for organizations because if we're going to follow Carolyn Layton's advice, right, and try to get more women into the C-suite, right, in the executive ranks and board of directors, people have to know about our capabilities and about our thought leadership and about our successes and what we're bringing to the table. And they won't know that if we don't speak up.
Right, and you can find your authentic voice.
You can find your authentic voice. Thank you, absolutely. And do it in a way that works for you. So, absolutely. So, thank you. So,
So I would say a couple of things. I mean, one from the perspective of somebody who was mentoring and coaching, and one from the perspective of what I found about myself specifically. So, on the mentoring and coaching aspect, one of the things that I've noticed very often is that I'm part of something called the Career Advisor Network at Intel, and a lot of people just reach out to me and they're thinking about changing jobs and stuff like that. And kind of a very common thing that I've seen across women when I compare it to men who seek my advice is that women seem to want to be completely excelling in a job before they take it on. Right. And to me that was a bit baffling because I have changed 7 different jobs during my career, and every one of those transitions, I tried to do something that I didn't know much about. Because, life is too short, I really needed to grow, and you can't grow on the side while you're doing some other job. So it's like you need to grow on the job. So to me, that was just a given. And it's all about what aspect you bring in that is advantageous to this job while you're actually picking up some other skill. That's how I've looked at it. But it was just amazing, that discrepancy between men and women, and clearly not everybody across the board, but I've seen that very commonly. And later on, I've seen it happen in research, both internal and external. And with men, it seemed to be if you're tangentially aware of something that has to do with this job, you're the perfect person for it, and they're going for it. And women are going, wait, but this last point in this thing, I'm not an expert in. And I think it's if I look at how important change is for growth, right? And how, especially in this day and age where most of the innovation happens really from kind of the broader sense of how the different disciplines come together and having a much broader perspective, because that allows you to optimize at a very different point in the spectrum. It's really, I think, detrimental to our success if we don't really challenge ourselves and start to think about what we bring rather than what we don't have.
Exactly.
So that's from a coaching standpoint. From my own perspective, one of the blind spots that I found, I've started my career about 17 years ago, and I would say probably through the first 7 years of my life, I was completely oblivious to the fact that I'm a woman. Okay? I mean, in other aspects of my life, I'm very aware of it, but not at my job, right? And it was actually, there was this one incident where I was made very aware on my job that, so I was doing this work when I was working on sensing and wireless sensor networks in the North Sea on an oil tanker for British Petroleum. And I wanted to do work on predictive maintenance, so I was doing vibration sensing and all of that in the engine room. And when I showed up, so my name is Lama, and Lama isn't something that comes with a gender association for many, definitely not in Ireland. Or Scotland. So when I went there, I neglected to mention that I'm a woman. So I stepped on the oil tanker. They knew I was coming. And the minute I stepped on, I said, "Hi, I'm Lama Nachman." And I saw multiple men stand up, run to the walls, bring down pictures from the walls, right? And I'm just like, I mean, when they stood up, I was like, wow, and I didn't even notice what was on the walls, right? But when they started taking them off, I'm like, oh my goodness, okay. So that, to me, was like, flash, I'm a woman, okay. And oil tankers, I should have thought about that. But more seriously though, the reason I mentioned this is, for me, I was always a technologist, right? In so many ways, I didn't want to think of myself as a woman because, if I started to think about what women need, that to me was kind of more of admitting that I'm not on equal footing, right? And it literally, it was just years and before I started to recognize how idiotic that was. And the reason I realized that is, I was an advocate for pretty much every underrepresented minority, right? And everything that was outside of the norm constantly. I'm constantly advocating for everything that seems different, right? And for me, it was having such a hard time understanding that it's important to apply those same concepts, right? They don't have the same opportunities. We don't have, all of the support that we need. It's a very, unfair, unbalanced world out there. And I was having a hard time comprehending that. And it was when I comprehended this and started, advocating and supporting and coaching and mentoring that, I finally realized that that's where I should be.
Right. Well, that's great. We teach what we need to learn, right? And she was clearly attracting people and situations to her that taught her certain lessons, and she needed to hear also. So that's fabulous. Thanks for that. I'm going to turn it back over to you now, Lauren, because one of the things that Lama was talking about is something that we discussed, namely the importance of going beyond your traditional functional role in technology depending on your career goals. And you started off in cloud computing, and then you moved into strategy. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Sure. So I've been a technologist almost my whole career. I love everything new about technology. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I was asked to start working on cloud computing, very, very early days. And my job at the time was to go out and work with clients and do discovery, talk about what is cloud computing, how might you use it, to do some joint development and proof of concepts with clients on how to really exploit the technology, which I really love because I have done that work pretty much since the time I graduated from the university, off and on, done other things, but that's pretty much who I am. And so in 2011, I was asked to go work on the corporate strategy team as the chief technology officer for cloud computing, and later that grew into our growth initiatives. And so it was, the first time I had ever really gone out of a technology function or function within the line organization into a business, a corporate, development strategy function. And it was very, very, very different. The thing that I learned about strategy, which actually makes it, I would say, my favorite career choice of everything that I've ever done, is strategy synthesizes everything that you've ever done in your career. And strategy is very demanding. I was lucky enough to take a course with a fabulous professor at Columbia, and he always says strategy takes no prisoners. You have to know technology, you have to know markets, you have to know business models, you have to get yourself into the quantitative aspects of finance and managerial accounting within your firm. You have to do stakeholder management. You have to communicate, both written communication and verbal communication. And I think the biggest thing of all is that you have to continually synthesize information, take a position that has risk to it, and be willing to listen to the reaction to all of the input that you receive, and then have the courage to continually reformulate your position until you get to that point, the sweet spot of what you're trying to do, which many of the panelists have discussed. And so I remember when I took the strategy role, Carolyn called me up and said, congratulations, not that many women work in strategy, and I'm really, proud that you got the role, and I'm going to want to hear more about it. And it's been almost 4 years now. And I tell you, I worked on the business side of let's set the strategy at the corporate level and work through very complex issues, very complicated, I think, robust industry that we work in, but I also work in a very complicated business model. But then 2 years ago, one of the executives asked me to come in and operationalize the strategy in the go-to-market. In a sense, that's harder because I liken it to, you're going 1,000 miles an hour and you're also trying to reconfigure yourself, and you've got to still perform. And so that's kind of my story about really stepping into a very different role. But, for me, the surprise was I really love the role. And actually, when I think about it, it's obvious after, in retrospect, because I like problem solving. And I think strategy is problem solving really at a peak level.
Right. Yeah, I think if you can start off in technology, you can move to problem solve in any aspect of business,
Exactly.
right? So that's a fabulous learning. So thank you. I want to switch gears a little bit and go back to you, Jennifer. And Jennifer is a volunteer for the American Whitewater Association, and she's helped with river cleanups. So I was wondering what lessons the river have taught you about navigating career challenges.
Sure. So when you posed this question, I absolutely loved it. So let me just take 2 quick little rules. The first is when you are moving through whitewater, and both my husband and I whitewater canoe, we do a lot of class 3, class 4 rivers, nice, beefy, good, juicy stuff. The first thing that you have to remember is that your mind has to think about what the end point is. When you're looking down the river, it's not about what the next turn is, it's about what the end of the rapid is and where you want to be. And you work from that end in mind upstream. So what are the moves that are going to get me to that place where that still water is at the end? And it's very much like your job or your career or project or anything that you might be working on. It's starting with that end in mind and then figuring out your way from the bottom up to the top. And the other thing I would say, and this is what I say to all newbies that we take on the river, is while you want to be cognizant of what the obstacles are, there might be a rock, there might be a rapid, there might be something that you don't want to hit. You want to make eye contact with it briefly, and then you want to look away. Because the more focused you are on that bad thing, the more likely you are to run into it. And that's a lot like our jobs and our work and what we face on a day-to-day basis. We're often most focused on where we think our failures are going to be instead of plotting out the course for where we want to go. So those are the lessons I like to think about and pass on to others.
I think that's fabulous. Thank you. That's wonderful. Very, very super creative. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. So please be thinking about who wants to raise their hand and get the mic brought over to them, okay? And that is Orna. I'd like to see from you. You mentioned living in a country that's not the most popular in the region all the time and has obviously experienced a lot of unrest and turmoil for decades. And so I was wondering, similarly, what leadership lessons that you have learned being a serial entrepreneur in this environment, navigating complexity and challenge and change?
So this is also the ring I'm wearing that is a triangular one. So it's knowledge, it's deterrence and survival, and it's competitive edge. And you always need to recognize the fact that you're not sitting in the main market. And your customers are not going to be 10 miles away from you. They will be 3,000 miles away from you, and the cost of go-to-market will be very significant. So you have very creative people. You have innovative people who can take creativity and make it practically useful in the market. You're always trying to guess the markets around, so you're solving big data problems from the day you're born. Execution and go-to-market. So for every aspect there are many positives to that story, because I mentioned big data. I can tell you that we solve big data problems because of lack of specific accessible information all the time. Mm-hmm. It's good for security, it's good for cybersecurity, it's good for many, many applications. We're reaching out, so networking is a very strong capability because we always need to reach out. We live in a non-democratic region, to say the least, and reaching out is only via, not via physical borders and land, but it's always through the air or through the sea. So we're good at networking, and putting those together makes you develop IP that is singular in its performance and its depth, but it is small in the sense that the boundaries are very clear and you can take it abroad. And if you look at EMC, then software-defined storage, flash technology, backup and recovery, because backup and recovery is mandatory when you have critical infrastructure, cybersecurity. Those type of areas are very, very strong, and you emphasize the strength. And one thing that I learned, which is not about equality, emphasize the strength. If you are trying to be always reaching to where it's popular worldwide, but is not something that you can be totally competitive in, forget about it. And that's where we are. So this is partially good. It's not sufficiently good because it's good for creating many startups and creating acquisitions as a result because they're good. But on the other hand, when IP is short-living on the ground, the societal impact of that IP is insufficient. And I am a socialist. I'm not a capitalist. If I only get myself well and I don't get the environment well or the society well, I'm not satisfied. So the other thing that we work on is actually developing infrastructure that has totally different nature of IP preservation. So IP stays for many long years and is having a much greater spillover economical impact on the society. So startups may have an impact for every engineer on about 3 to 5 additional people in the environment, serving anything from restaurants to welding, and when you go into long-term projects, it goes from 6 to 10. And that's where we want to be philosophically. Because of our alienation and our geographical distance, we need to have a mix. Right, yeah. So I think that relative to our situation, the strength of the currency is actually negative in my eyes because the currency in Israel is too strong and makes us a little bit less competitive than when we had the more balanced exchange rate. But we always adapt. We're very, very quickly to adapt because that's, what do we have other than creating influx of foreign direct investments and partnerships? That's the thing we have.
Well, again, it's all networking, right? And it's all building on your strength, right, in your core. And I love what you're saying, too, because I think so often we can get insular, right, in our country. And I think it's so thank you so much for coming here, because I think it's so important to hear from women's voices around the world. And I know that's one focus that WITI is having in the future, is there is an international presence and even making it more. So thank you so much for facilitating that conversation for us. Absolutely.